This video is sponsored by World Anvil. The Legend of Zelda encompasses all of the elements I love about games. A sense of liberating freedom as you explore an immaculately rich and purposeful fantasy world. Storytelling methods intrinsic to video games. And while I have looked at almost every game in the main series in depth, I wanted to single out a specific element that in and of itself encompasses Zelda and its various elements. Music. From the beginning of the series to the present day, the music of Zelda has had an exceptional grasp on the power of leitmotif, and these melodies are directly intertwined with gameplay in multiple contexts across the series. And this is just how Koji Kondo tends to compose music. He writes to directly serve gameplay, rather than just complement it or exist as background accompaniment. In the early 1980s, music and jingles in games, particularly arcade games, were meant to catch attention more than they were genuine realizations of a game's world. Take Galaga, for example, which plays a 9-second jingle every time you start the game. Aside from a reprise at the end of each bonus stage, the game is composed of nothing but sound effects, but that starting jingle is still satisfying enough to grab your attention from across the arcade. When writing for Super Mario Bros., Kondo had two goals, and these would soon change how music was written for games. He wanted to, quote, convey an unambiguous sonic image of the game world, and to enhance the emotional and physical experience of the gamer, as Andrew Schartmann recounts in his book on the Super Mario Bros. Soundtrack. Realization of the game's world in the context of Super Mario Bros. Meant creating a theme for the game that synchronized with the actions of the player. This was achieved by consistently rewriting the theme to fit the pace of the game as it was being designed. The final theme incorporates several rhythms playing in tandem, and this use of syncopation creates an offset beat that allows the sound effects to become a part of the score. The ever-changing, catchy nature of the game's theme is synonymous with its gameplay of running and jumping in precise, swift motions. With this game's score, video game music became something more. Composers became an active participant in a game's design, and music can dictate how a game is to be played. Fast forward about 13 years and Nintendo released The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, a game that felt like the pinnacle of this very notion. I'm sure a lot of us have fond memories with its soundtrack, and the titular instrument saw increased popularity pretty much immediately after its release. The reason? The melodies associated with so many things across the game are implemented as a game mechanic for performing specific actions. The game's soundtrack is a core part of its design in a wildly unorthodox manner. But ever since this game, several Zelda games would go on to feature instruments of their own, all built from the idea that music can connect players with every facet of a game. Ocarina of Time's soundtrack isn't legendary just because it's memorable, catchy, or evocative of the game's world. It's also legendary because you get to perform it yourself, and every time you do, you are reminded of what each melody stands for, reinforcing their power. The soundtrack doesn't just accompany you on your adventure, it is key to completing it. It was and still is a brilliant game mechanic. Its power all thanks to Koji Kondo in his final solo effort as composer. In this video, we'll be dissecting the power of Ocarina of Time's soundtrack, its use as a game mechanic, and its connection to the game's design and its themes. I'm Liam Triforce, and this is Understanding the Music of Ocarina of Time. But first, a quick look at how Zelda established its grasp on sonic presentation of a game world. The original Legend of Zelda's score was composed solely by Koji Kondo, as was the case with Super Mario Bros. The title screen was originally set to feature Maurice Ravel's piece Bolero, but upon learning that it was still not public domain at the time, Kondo scrambled to write and arrange a new title and overworld theme in a single day. In the end, this theme would persist throughout the entire series, one that signals the most powerful asset in Zelda's DNA: adventure. The title theme uses that lead melody to set the stage for the game, played at a slower tempo with drawn-out notes to create a sense of anticipation for the adventure that is about to take place. It had this weight that few NES games carried from the onset. Alongside games like Final Fantasy and Metroid, it felt like you were about to embark on a real journey. Then, as soon as you name your character, you are thrown into the world of Hyrule. I've spoken at length about why the original Zelda is so special if you'd like to hear about that, but in short, the game is mystery and adventure in one of the purest forms imaginable, enabling you to use your own intuition and experimentation through knowledge of the game's manual and fold-out map, as well as the various hints in both the manual and the game itself. Very few games, even in the Zelda series, have emulated how it feels to solve the world of the original Zelda, and it is all perfectly accompanied by a heroic, adventurous theme we are now all too familiar with. Much like the Super Mario Bros. Theme, Zelda's theme uses a catchy and diverse chord pattern and is instantly memorable and empowering to listen to. Despite how much overworld exploration takes place, it never seems to get old. Contrasting this is the dungeon theme, which is decidedly more ambiguous, foreboding, and mysterious. It uses a sequence of 4 notes, repeating in different pitches, while the bass line creates that atmosphere of mystique I mentioned. At the end of the theme, the sequence of notes combine with the bass line in an ascending chord pattern, and the theme loops from there. The distinctness in these two themes is worth noting, as Koji Kondo has this remarkable ability to tell players how they should be feeling exclusively through music, even within the limitations of the Famicom and NES. When you finally reach Death Mountain and approach Ganon, slowly but surely through the largest, most confusing labyrinth in the game, you are backed by a simple sequence of notes that create a brutal sense of tension, all the way up to the moment in which you deliver the final blow. When you complete the game, the Game Over theme is rearranged to incorporate a bass line shortly after it begins, and it quickly becomes more upbeat and happy as it continues, almost having the pace of a Mario track. It is well deserved too, as completing the original Zelda is no small feat. Even if you were to spoil the game for yourself with a full walkthrough, the combat is relentless, and you'll need to practice positioning, use items effectively, and master your sword thrusts in order to make it through Death Mountain. Another thing that the original Zelda established was the series' most iconic sound, the puzzle-solved jingle. A simple series of notes, but one that has lived on since this game with little to no changes. Each game will implement it with instrumentation befitting of its setting and sound direction, like Skyward Sword's harp, or Breath of the Wild's piano, but the jingle remains untouched. The entire Zelda series is built on the feeling of satisfaction you get when solving a problem, and encapsulating that feeling in a jingle that conveys both congratulations and mystery as to what lies ahead is brilliant. A Link to the Past was the next Zelda game to be solely composed by Koji Kondo, and with the Super Nintendo's more substantial sound capabilities, he had more freedom to create soundscapes evocative of the game's visuals and atmosphere. On top of that, the game had far more music than the original game, and single-handedly established a lot of Zelda's musical identity through its leitmotifs. The game's intro is still perfect. You are contacted telepathically by Princess Zelda from the dungeon of the castle, and your uncle heads out. Once you choose to follow him, you are met with a brutal thunderstorm outside, the sounds of rain and thunder feeling like a part of the suspenseful ascending melody that accompanies your journey toward the castle. Once inside, you are met with the theme that quickly became associated with Hyrule's royal family. And in the context of attempting to navigate the game's centerpiece, Hyrule Castle, it is incredible. It also serves as a fantastic introduction to the Super Nintendo's increased sound fidelity, as the drums and horns in the background create this palpable sense of rhythm, both catchy and compelling as you move forward. Other leitmotifs established by this game include Princess Zelda's theme, which would later become known as Zelda's Lullaby, and it is used both when you meet her for the first time and when you save each of the 7 maidens during the Dark World portion of the game, each of them getting you one step closer to saving Hyrule altogether. It also introduced Ganon's theme, a daunting ascending melody that uses Shepard's tone to reflect how intimidating he is as the one true impediment to your goal. Kakariko Village becomes a recurring locale in the series, and its peaceful theme features no percussion and no urgency. It is simply a retreat from everything else in the game, and is home to several side activities throughout your adventure. This is true for every game it features in. It also introduced the Master Sword in its iconic jingle, one that still gives me goosebumps to this day. The most important leitmotif introduced, however, is the one composed for the save select screen and fairy fountains. With its use of sequencing, as well as polyrhythm for its accompaniment, it creates a certain amount of melancholy and reflectiveness alongside its calm nature. It's no wonder that it plays on the file select screen, as that screen is both the start of a new adventure and the last thing you see and hear before you continue it with every play session. And of course, the overworld theme we all know and love was rearranged for the Super Nintendo, and it sounds great. A Link to the Past also featured great pieces of its own, such as the Dark World theme. After confronting Aghanim, you are thrown into this place just as you thought you'd mastered Hyrule's layout. It is a cruel vision of Hyrule, a corrupted parallel world brought about by Ganon, and the enemies and interconnected layouts of both the Light and Dark World aim to challenge you like you've never been challenged before. The Dark World is fittingly unfamiliar and intimidating, but it carries an essence of triumphancy, creating a theme that wants you to succeed. It just feels great to hear as you go through the Dark World. Of course, this video isn't about A Link to the Past soundtrack on its own, but rather how it more firmly established one of the most important core elements of the series, and how that paved the way for the rest of the series to utilize leitmotifs in meaningful ways. As it stands, the story of A Link to the Past is simple, which is not at all a detriment to its quality. Simply put, your journey through the game was the story, and these compositions all greatly heighten your accomplishments. With that said, I would be sorely remiss to not mention my favorite use of melody in A Link to the Past, as I believe it was the precursor to Ocarina of Time's central mechanic. On your adventure, you may come across a boy playing a flute in the woods, lots of animals surrounding him. When you approach him, he will disappear and the music will cease. If you go to the same place in the Dark World, you will discover that the boy turned into something else, some kind of creature, and he can no longer play his flute. He asks you to find it and play it for him so that he can hear it one last time. If you find the boy's father, he'll tell you to play the flute in front of the weather vane, upon which you'll gain the ability to travel quickly to several locations across Hyrule without having to walk. One of the best rewards for a side quest in the entire game, and one that carries a heavy emotional weight. The melody itself is wistful, yet it carries a sense of finality and peace, like a requiem, as if you're laying someone you've lost to rest for good. Every time you hear that flute melody, it is backed by the effects of the Dark World on this poor boy. That said, the melody allows his memory to live on. It's a surprisingly poignant story for a game with a thin narrative, and it's moments like these that contribute to my strong love for The Legend of Zelda. I believe the weight this melody carried, as well as the flute performing a specific action once obtained, both formed the basis for what Ocarina of Time eventually became. As I mentioned, Ocarina of Time was Koji Kondo's final solo score for a video game. Majora's Mask immediately employed the help of Toru Minagishi, whom you probably know for his continued work on Zelda as well as the Splatoon series, and Wind Waker was a collaborative effort between those two, as well as Kenta Nagata and Hajime Wakai. For his final solo project, he went all out, tying music to gameplay itself and letting players further connect with the soundtrack. There's a lot to unpack with Ocarina of Time, and I suppose the game's main theme is the perfect place to begin. As we fade in, we hear the sounds of Link galloping across Hyrule Field on Epona, and the piano and strings pick up. The logo soon comes into view, and the game's lead instrument whisks us away to another world. Quite literally, too, as the melody it uses is derived from the flute jingle in the original Zelda, an item used to transport yourself across Hyrule. Upon first playing the game, I distinctly remember this feeling of melancholy and sadness overtaking me, but I didn't necessarily understand why. Ocarina of Time's main theme takes on different meanings as you play through the game, and as it lives on in memory. After a rather ominous premonition from a boy who does not have a fairy, and a warning from the Great Deku Tree to Navi, we step out into Kokiri Forest, which is still a brilliant tutorial area in and of itself, disguising a lot of its teaching tools through just allowing the player to explore and find ways to learn about the game, as well as obtain a sword and shield themselves. Just so I don't run the risk of being redundant, I won't talk much about why this game is awesome, as I already did a few years ago in my Ocarina of Time retrospective. Kokiri Forest is particularly memorable for being such a secluded area. There's no view of the outside world from the forest, fairies dance in the air, and the Kokiri play and run around all day. Considering the Kokiri never grow up, this area carries an eternal atmosphere of childhood innocence, and only presents any real danger if you choose to leave its boundaries for whatever reason. The music carries this feeling perfectly with a memorable melody that I still catch myself whistling while I'm doing things other than playing the game. Things change as you accept your task from the Great Deku Tree. As soon as you enter, you're greeted with an ambient woodwind piece that is mysterious and eerie, yet calming and compelling at the same time. This theme also plays when you find a cave in the overworld, and it pretty much started my obsession with ambient cave music in Zelda. The moments in between great accomplishments or progress, and what they say about each game through their composition. Ocarina of Time wants you to be curious, and it wants you to delve into its world because it wants you to value the time you spend in it. Soon enough, you'll be leaving the comfy bounds of your home, setting off on an adventure, and leaving your childhood firmly behind you. Ocarina of Time explores this not just through its game design and writing, but also its soundtrack. After learning of the history of Hyrule and saying our final goodbyes to Kokiri Forest, we finally set foot in Hyrule Field and get a glimpse into just how big this world is. The Hyrule Field theme in Ocarina of Time is remarkably diverse in melody, and adapts to whatever you might be doing in the game at any given moment. Its ability to dynamically adapt to gameplay was actually pretty novel at the time, and it adapts in 3 ways. First, there's music for when you're running or galloping across the plains. Next, it will transition into combat music whenever you encounter an enemy. Finally, if you stop to take a rest and stand still for a bit, the music will drop its percussion and introduce a harp to allow you some time to breathe. As for the diversity in its composition, this is due in part to the fact that it contains several references to the Zelda series in the actual notes. Though due to the tempo and rhythm of Hyrule Field's music, you can only catch brief hints of those references, with the exception of the iconic Zelda Overworld theme that can be heard at multiple points throughout the theme. Other references include the Game Over and credits melodies from the original Zelda, which is merged beautifully with the original Zelda's Overworld theme to the point where you might not even hear the similarity at first. In addition, the theme's rhythm and marching percussion feel extremely reminiscent of Tall Tall Heights from Link's Awakening. And certain sections of the theme have this oppressive, almost martial feeling as you trot onward, reminding me of the Dark World or Hyrule Castle from A Link to the Past. With some of these references, I almost feel like I'm reaching because they're hard to spot, and that was Koji Kondo's intent. Here are his words from November 1998. I arranged songs from all the Zeldas up to now in the score to Hyrule Field. It looks like not many people have recognized them. In fact, there were even people on staff who didn't notice. The dynamic nature of the song, both in how it reacts to your actions and its composition as a whole, make it an absolutely stellar and genius piece of music. For the NES and Famicom, Koji Kondo deliberately tried to write music that you could never get sick of, and that has resulted in melodies that survive decades in popular culture. If Kondo wanted to write something that wouldn't get old considering how much time you spend in Hyrule Field, he succeeded. The melodic makeup of Hyrule Field's theme is derived from a lot of past Zelda music, but it is not explicit when it references that music, making it both a culmination of Kondo's work on the series up to that point, and a testament to his incredible ability to create memorable music. From here, you wade through groups of people and slip past the castle guards to make it to Princess Zelda, and inform her of what will become of Hyrule. Your introduction to Princess Zelda means hearing her theme for the first time. Zelda's lullaby, returning from A Link to the Past, conveys such a wonderful gentleness and solidifies your connection to her. This is where the brilliance of the ocarina as a mechanic truly starts to unfold. Each melody you learn is representative of significant people and moments across your adventure. When you use Zelda's lullaby across the game, you are often prompted through iconography of the royal family in the Sacred Realm. You are reminded of her not just through the visual representations, but also the melody itself. While Zelda's lullaby already existed in some form, all other melodies you learn were written for the limited notation of the in-game ocarina. You can only play a specific number of notes, and despite working within those confines, Koji Kondo demonstrates such an incredible ability to imbue character in each simple melody, working in tandem with the game's designers and scenario writers. Not only do the pieces each have utility, but they all carry meaning that evolves as you progress through the game, making them profoundly memorable. One of the first examples of this is born from your exit from Kokiri Forest. Saria knows that you are bound to leave eventually, and gives you her ocarina as a gift. Shortly after you are tasked with saving Hyrule, Navi suggests visiting her once again, so that she understands the gravity of your journey. This takes you through the Lost Woods, accompanied by spatial audio that guides you through its maze of tunnels. It's not a complicated melody, but it still manages to be infectiously catchy. That said, there is still an atmosphere of uneasiness, especially if you know the views of the Kokiri on what happens if you get lost in those woods. Children who get lost turn into Skull Kids, and adults turn into Stalfos. Pretty harrowing, and you have to wonder why Saria hangs out in the depths of the Lost Woods. But if you manage to make it past the club moblins in the Sacred Forest Meadow, you'll realize that Saria was actually the one playing that melody on her ocarina, calling out to you from the depths of the forest. Now, every time you play her melody, you'll be able to talk with her directly, and every time you find yourself in the Lost Woods, you'll think of Saria. The Lost Woods' connection to Saria embodies what the Kokiri Forest and your friendship with Saria is all about. A yearning, nostalgic attachment to the simpler days of our youth. As a further example of this melody's power, let's look at the Gorons of Goron City, especially Darunia. Ganondorf has cut off the Gorons' food supply, forcing Darunia to hide the spiritual stone from the other Gorons so that they don't eat it. I never fully understood how the Gorons were facing a rock famine when they were surrounded by rocks, but whatever. The point is, they are troubled. A couple of Gorons talk about the tranquil nostalgia of the music that comes from the forest, and if you play Saria's song for Darunia, he forgets his troubles, if only for a moment, and once you clear out Dodongo's cavern, Darunia dubs you his sworn brother. This is a powerful moment when you understand the subtext of growing up, something that Ocarina of Time wants you to pay attention to more and more as time goes on. My favorite attachment of any Ocarina song to a moment in the game is when you arrive at Lon Lon Ranch as a child. The theme of the ranch begins with a laid-back guitar, and as you approach, the lead melody's instrument is overtaken by Malon's voice. You previously meet Malon as you attempt to wake her dad and infiltrate the castle, but if you visit her ranch, she'll introduce you to her horse, Epona. She'll teach you the song she's been singing, and when you play it, Epona will really seem to like you. This melody embodies everything I love about Lon Lon Ranch, from its lack of any urgent threat, to its secrets, to the characters that live here. This feels like a home away from home. The part of the theme that always gets to me is when the strings come in, giving the theme this feeling of warmth and comfort beyond just the melody itself. When recording for this video, I actually happened to arrive at the ranch at sunset, which made the setting for this introduction to Epona and the ranch absolutely perfect in every sense of the word. As for the utility of Epona's song, it allows you to summon Epona at any time, so long as you escape with her from Lon Lon Ranch after Ingo takes it over. It stands as a connection not just to her, but also Malon and the ranch itself. Keeping all of these melodies we've learned in mind, let's talk about how the things they represent evolve as you pull the Master Sword from its pedestal. Once you've recovered all 3 spiritual stones, you have to rush to the Temple of Time and obtain the Master Sword. Zelda is escorted to safety by Impa just as the premonition at the beginning of the game demonstrated, but Zelda gives you the titular Ocarina of Time, and you learn the Song of Time so that you can enter the Sacred Realm. The Temple of Time's theme carries with it the Song of Time, and although it is nothing but a MIDI choir being played on a synthesizer, it still carries this sense of scale and weight that left a huge impression on me. This temple serves as the setting for your swift jump from childhood to adulthood, and it only makes sense that its ambience be evocative of that transition. Later on, you actually learn the Prelude of Light, which allows you to return to the Temple of Time at any point should you need to quickly go back and forth between time. The nature of this melody is exciting, and I've always seen it as an embodiment of the dynamic where, as a kid, you can't wait to grow up, but as an adult, you yearn for the days where things were simpler. And going through the Temple of Time again gives you an opportunity to do both, therefore defining the Prelude of Light as a composition. During the adult era of Ocarina of Time, you are greeted by a mysterious figure known only as Sheik, who delivers monologues regarding each bond you've formed across the game, as well as teaching you melodies, all embodying these bonds, that also warp you to the locations of their temple, since they are actually sages. Sheik teaches you these melodies on a harp, and Sheik's theme is evocative of the character's nature, delivering you this knowledge through no ulterior motive, but through a genuine desire to want you, as the player, to understand what these characters you've met actually represent in the process of growing up. Sheik brings the subtext of this game to the forefront. While I've already discussed this in depth in my Ocarina of Time retrospective, I want to specifically talk about how this relates to the melodies and themes of each area and character. Something pretty profound about this game that I've noticed is that each of these melodies relating to the temples and sages are much more complicated to learn and memorize, using more than just a repeated sequence of 3 notes, and using words and compositions more verbose than just song, like bolero or nocturne, a clear indication of your maturity, and a fitting way to end a particular arc of your growth. With Saria, Sheik conveys that although time can be cruel, your memories of younger days are constant and are valid. Your attachment to Saria through the melody of the Lost Woods will always live on. And to close this chapter of your life, you learn the Minuet of Forest. A minuet is usually defined as a ballroom dance of 2 people, a heartfelt way to symbolize the bond between you and Saria, and the theme's composition reflects this. With Darunia, you are informed that any strong bond of friendship you've established that lives on into adulthood is a righteous power, and you learn the Bolero of Fire, a marching dance melody that stands as a representation of the flaming passion of friendship, or at the very least, Darunia's idea of friendship. Before the Water Temple, Sheik teaches you the Serenade of Water, asking you to reflect upon your own growth in the clear water's surface. The line, "A childish mind will turn to noble ambition, young love will become deep affection," are both references to not just how you begin to realize what's most important in life as you grow older, but also how Ruto casts aside her childish crush for the sake of the world as you work towards completing the Water Temple. A serenade implies romance, as in to serenade someone, no doubt relating to how feelings of affection for someone are much different as an adult than a childhood crush, and Ruto's decision in the Water Temple reflects that growth. Before we continue on with the themes for the other sages, we ought to talk about something that has always resonated with me regarding Ocarina of Time: the moments in between major narrative revelations. The music pieces accompanying the journey, not necessarily a significant destination. The ambience of Ocarina of Time is beautifully constructed, both through its visual and music direction. Take for example Kakariko Village, a place you'll no doubt be visiting numerous times throughout your journey. It rearranges the theme from A Link to the Past, and gives the village that similar atmosphere of peace and tranquility. However, when you return as an adult, it carries an entirely different feeling. It feels restless and less fulfilled due to the lack of backing instrumentation, with nothing but strings to move it forward. It's amazing how just a simple change can shift a piece's atmosphere from calming to depressing, and it feels especially poignant in a game about things familiar to you changing as you grow up. Certain characters that used to be here are no longer present. Seeing as Ganondorf has a chokehold on Hyrule at this point in the story, it's no wonder things would be a little more dour here. Another major area, Zora's Domain, has some of the most enveloping music in the game. Driven by steel drums, an ethereal synth, and an elegant harp, the theme paints a vivid picture of its own, being evocative of the water's reflection on the walls of the domain and the deep shades of blue. It has an elegance to it that the Zora themselves carry, and it's one of my favorite pieces in the Zelda series. Koji Kondo also made it a point to accompany the small areas, both optional and mandatory, with rich compositions to make them stand out. I've mentioned the caves, but let's also talk about fairy fountains, which use a harp to reflect their elegance. Accompanied by these starry visuals, they're still my favorite fairy fountains in the series. Then you have the Ice Cavern, a mini dungeon that you were required to go through in order to learn the Serenade of Water and obtain the Iron Boots, but one that has very little presence in the game's overall runtime. That being said, it contains a memorable atmospheric piece that glistens with the ice and crystals that decorate the cavern walls. Along with the ambience found in caves, the ice cavern felt like a defining moment in Zelda's atmospheric music, and it's these little moments that shed light on just how well realized the world of Hyrule is, not just in design, but also sonically. Along with the major landmarks being significantly fleshed out, the small secrets you can uncover feel just as rewarding, and this is due in part to Kondo's philosophy on composing. In an Iwata Asks interview, he differentiated composing for film and composing for games, likening the importance of projecting where a player is and how they should be feeling to composing for a TV commercial. When you hear an intro or a jingle at the beginning of the commercial, you know exactly what is being advertised to you. Kondo took this philosophy and utilized it to the fullest in his music, telling players when they lose a life in Super Mario Bros. Solely through music to try again rather than "you suck." I'm paraphrasing, but that is the general idea behind his composing style. Conveying clearly identifiable character and emotion through music is an extremely important facet of game design, at least to me. This contributed a lot to why the ambience of Zelda is so enticing, and this is also precisely that unambiguous sonic image mentioned at the beginning of the video. When it comes to ambience in Ocarina of Time, however, we should talk about the compositions Kondo created for the game's dungeons, as they are incredible examples of that philosophy of projecting character through music. The soundscapes in Ocarina of Time's dungeons cover a wide range of emotions, and according to Kondo, he was instructed to create music that didn't give players anything to latch onto, with the only thing to break up the soundscape being the battle theme that fades in whenever an enemy sees you. The inside of the Deku Tree is a great example of that vague sense of intrigue. But then comes Dodongo's Cavern, which is a soundscape consisting of nothing but these low humming sounds, bone-chilling distant noises, and these haunting, unidentifiable screeches that come in at different pitches. It sounds more like a soundscape for Half-Life than it does Ocarina of Time. But when you consider the dark and volcanic nature of Dodongo's Cavern, it feels oddly compelling. Much like the original Zelda, there is indeed a stark contrast between Hyrule's various themes and the stuff you hear in dungeons. Not all dungeon ambience sounds like this, though. Upon being swallowed up by Jabu Jabu, you are greeted to a truly brilliant soundscape. Like other dungeons, this piece is not defined by melody, but instead by Jabu Jabu's heartbeat, conveyed through the percussion here. It is intentionally offbeat and disorienting, emulating the sound of a real heart, and helping to sell the discomfort of walking through Jabu Jabu's internal organs. It's a crystal clear realization of the setting here, as it feels like a living and quite literally breathing sonic representation of Jabu Jabu's insides, which is gross, but that's the point. In contrast to these two dungeons, however, the temples in the adult era of Ocarina of Time have more defined compositions, seeing as they are full-on sacred temples rather than the inside of a fish or a tree. The Forest Temple's music has always been one of my favorite pieces in the game, as it is mixed to sound confusing, emulating the layout of the dungeon itself with its multiple routes and perplexing interconnected halls. If you're playing with headphones or a good sound system, the instrumentation and samples reverberate and spiral around all sides, as if to throw you off. But underlying all of this confusion is beauty, some semblance of melody among the discord. Again, it feels like an entirely audio-based realization of the Forest Temple's visuals and level design. Next comes the Fire Temple, which has a bit of a story to it. I know I talked about this in my old Ocarina of Time video, but I'll discuss it again considering this is a video about the music after all. In versions 1.0 and 1.1 of this game, the centerpiece of this theme is a sample from the commercial sample CD, Voice Spectral Volume 1. It samples the 76th track, which features recordings of Islamic chanting. In-game it is chopped up, but it is almost certainly audible if you know any Arabic. In every subsequent version, the track's vocals are replaced with a synthesized choir, due to Nintendo of America's policies at the time prohibiting references to religion in any form. This also resulted in the original Gerudo symbol, which was extremely similar to the crescent moon and star symbol associated with Islam, to be replaced with the Gerudo symbol we know today. What you probably didn't know is that this vocal sample is in several other games, including Cruisin' World, Parasite Eve 2, and even in a game as recent as Street Fighter V, though it was eventually changed. In addition, this CD was also sampled in early versions of Mario 64 for Mario's original voice. Needless to say, the CD has proved popular, but I don't want this to overshadow discussion of the dungeon track itself. Though the lyrics of the chanting are entirely out of place, the intent of the vocals themselves create the core of the Fire Temple's ambience. While the drums and general instrumentation of the track remind me of the Gorons, the chanting seems to embody the revival of Volvagia, the fact that Ganondorf is feeding Gorons to Volvagia, and also the Gorons praying for their survival. I completely understand the track being removed from the game, but the revised version of the track simply doesn't carry the same weight. Following this is the Water Temple. While most of this dungeon is accompanied by the sounds of your own thoughts telling you that you've already been in that room 3 times, as well as the sounds of the menu opening up to equip the iron boots for the 40th time, the track itself is equal parts tranquil and eerie. Its reverberant chimes are evocative of the dungeon's beautiful visual design, while its flute and dulcimer give the ambience a hint of uncertainty. The track knows exactly how lost you are going to be when attempting to chart a linear path through all of these different doors. And it is the only part of the dungeon that doesn't ever wear on me during extended play sessions. It is the perfect track for a dungeon this complicated, complementing its design and bringing its atmosphere to life. The Shadow Temple and its mini-dungeon, the Bottom of the Well, both paint a picture of a man who was punished for seeing the truth of Hyrule's bloody history. The Nocturne of Shadow even foreshadows all of this with its dour melody. In the well, you can see skeletons strewn about everywhere, blood smeared all over the walls and floors, and the Shadow Temple itself is decorated with human remains to make it appear as some sort of twisted catacomb. Even for Ocarina of Time, this is a dark portion of the game, and it intentionally skimps out on answers. Thematically, no other portion of the game lines up with it, and while I used to think that these were all the remains of the royal family's prisoners of war, or the Sheikah's prisoners at that, it seems more likely to me that they are from long before Hyrule was unified, during the war for the Triforce that led to the unification of all of Hyrule's people. Regardless of where the truth lies, simply showing you what lies beneath the surface, and quite literally symbolizing this with the Lens of Truth item, is enough to make for a disturbing concept for a dungeon, as well as the boss itself, seeing as Bongo Bongo appears to be a mutilated corpse with its hands cut off. Whatever this evil spirit might be, he is angry, and he is raising hell in Kakariko Village. Whether or not he has a right to be angry is ultimately for you to decide based on the sights and sounds presented to you. The boss for this dungeon is represented in the music through one specific instrument, the bongos in the background, and when you reach that fight, you'll notice that his chanting is synchronized with him hitting the bongos. It's a wonderful example of the music actually dictating game design in a subtle way, as you have to time your attacks to avoid being sent into the air from the vibrations of each bongo hit. The final dungeon, the Spirit Temple, comes after a long journey through a region of Hyrule that you won't find yourself visiting very often, unless you decide to complete the trading quest or grab a couple of heart pieces. Because of this, it is home to a lot of unique content, including the Gerudo training grounds, which means you'll be spending a lot of time in this region before you reach the temple. As such, Koji Kondo had a pretty daunting task. He needed to write a piece of music for a desert region, one representing a culture with a rich sense of identity and history, one that accompanies a non-linear adventure through the training grounds, and a perilous walk through the harsh sandstorms that take place in between the training grounds and the temple, all without the track ever getting old. To put it simply, he understood the assignment, writing one of the best pieces of his entire career. This is the theme for Gerudo Valley. heavy influence from Spanish flamenco music. The theme uses guitars, a double bass, trumpets to heighten the apex of the song's melodies, and clapping to drive its percussion, the clapping giving it the dance feeling that inspired so many of Koji Kondo's tracks in the past. Its melody, like the Super Mario Bros. Theme or Hyrule Fields music, does not settle on one sequence, instead changing and evolving as it continues. Compared to other themes in Ocarina of Time's score, it doesn't portray any one emotion. To me, it instead fuels determination. In contrast to nearly every other overworld area, Gerudo Valley sounds larger than life, and it is an all-encompassing musical presentation of the region, its people, and your journey through it all. It is a masterpiece. In 2015, a video was uploaded of two members of the self-proclaimed heavy flamenco band Malkura performing Gerudo Valley's theme on the streets of Melbourne, Australia. These two are incredible guitar players. Imagine walking through Melbourne hearing this incredible music reminiscent of Spanish flamenco and not knowing that it's from The Legend of Zelda. This is just a personal anecdote, but there seems to be a sort of disdain for music specifically when it's written for a video game, at least where I'm from. I'm sure this just doesn't exist to the same extent in Japan, where Ocarina of Time was developed, but I think a lot of this stems from the fact that video games require people to pass a barrier of entry. They require a set of skills to be developed in order for them to be experienced fully, meaning that they can't be experienced like a film or TV show. Therefore, the weird looks I get when the uninitiated find out a certain piece of music is from a game make a lot of sense to me. I mean, fair enough, what would they know about games or game music? Koji Kondo, on the other hand, has managed time and time again to create music that transcends the medium it was written for. The Super Mario Bros. Theme did it once already. Malkura's performance of Gerudo Valley is a testament to that. Their cover of the theme brought forth the Spanish influence and transformed it into something that the people walking by could just stop and enjoy, regardless of whether or not they had even played a video game or knew what Zelda was. The video is a living example of Koji Kondo's songwriting and its effect on people from all walks of life. After making it through the desert, you'll finally reach the Desert Colossus, and you'll learn the Requiem of Spirit from Sheik after realizing that this dungeon requires you to go back and forth through time to fully complete it. Calling it a Requiem adds a lot of weight to the theme, as the connotations of this definition imply laying souls to rest, and the dungeon itself hauntingly reflects this. The Spirit Temple's theme introduces itself with an atmosphere of trepidation through the bang of a gong, the glistening sounds of wind chimes, and the strings which continue into the rest of the song, as the lead instrument takes over. Because most of Ocarina of Time's soundtrack is synthetic and sampled, it's hard to accurately place what instrument this is because Kondo tends to play with the pitch of each note. But it sounds reminiscent of an Arabic mizmar. That seems to be what he was going for, but again, it's a sample on a synthesizer that was heavily messed with. Ultimately, the fact that I can't exactly place the instrument makes the piece more enjoyable and mysterious to me. Much like Gerudo Valley's theme, the Spirit Temple carries a large, intimidating presence through its instrumentation, adding to its mysteriousness and selling the weight of this being the final temple of the game. Nabooru is the last sage you need to awaken to truly combat Ganondorf. That being said, this is still hallowed ground, and you should tread lightly. With all of the sages recovered, Princess Zelda drops the Sheik persona and reveals herself as the 7th sage, only to be captured by Ganondorf upon giving you the light arrows. How convenient. The only thing left to do now is make for Ganondorf's tower, which sits atop the smoldering remains of Hyrule Castle. Upon entering the tower with the sage's power, you are first greeted to a soundscape composed of scattered piano hits, an extremely low synthetic choir, and screeching drones reminiscent of Dodongo's Cavern. There's even less to latch onto here than most dungeons across the game, and it brings the smorgasbord of challenging problem solving to the forefront. The piano hits, to me, also serve as an introduction to one of the coolest uses of music in the entire game. After clearing every challenge and beginning your true ascent through the tower, you'll hear an organ in the distance playing Ganon's theme. It gets louder and louder as you get closer to the top of the tower, and once you finally fight your way through the Lizalfos and Iron Knuckles that stand in your way, you'll realize that the person playing the organ is Ganondorf himself. The dude basks in his own narcissism, and it's a decision that makes him more lovable as a villain. Ganon's theme is an ascending melody built from the auditory illusion of a shepherd's scale, and repurposing that melody from A Link to the Past for a tower that you have to climb is absolutely brilliant. It creates this sense of anticipation and excitement as you get closer and closer to his throne room, and the feeling this gave me on my first playthrough is something that stuck with me forever. I remember I could feel my heart beating faster as I approached the top, and after all that, all I had to do was play tennis with him. It's kind of funny though, because the simple act of timing your button presses correctly to bring Ganondorf down provides enough intensity that I always looked forward to it, as comical as it looks. And when it comes to the music of this fight, it treats this tennis match with the reverence it rightly deserves. The song's intro begins in 4/4 time, but then you have a barrage of notes as it quickly transitions into 23/16. The percussion and later the horns are written as if the world is ending if Ganondorf wins this tennis match, and it is great fun to listen to. Ultimately, after winning against Ganondorf, he makes a last-ditch effort to sink you with his tower, and you and Zelda rush out before it collapses. From the ashes of the tower emerges Ganon. Just Ganon. The beast has risen. The music beautifully represents all facets of what the battle stands for. The percussion drives the battle forward. The low choir that was once present in the tower's challenge den represents this demon towering over you, his eyes the only thing shining through the darkness. The high choir, to me, embodies the sages watching over you as you attempt to slay the beast. The strings represent you as you slash and cut through Ganon's defenses. All of these elements come together in a harmonious consolidation that stands, once again, as a perfect symphonic realization of the final battle. There aren't many elements at play in the music, but the elements that are there come together so well, and give so much gravitas to an already frightening and intense final fight. It is simply flawless in execution, and plays a huge part in this fight, being one of my favorite final bosses in Zelda history. With Ganon's defeat, peace is restored to Hyrule, but there's one thing left to take care of. Zelda gives you the opportunity to live the skipped 7 years of your childhood by sending you back in time. She plays the same melody on her ocarina that you learned from her when the two of you first met, Zelda's Lullaby. A touching way to come full circle. The credits of Ocarina of Time take you on a final journey through the world you fought to save as you leave it behind. And its music contains multiple pieces to feel like an all-encompassing farewell. The beginning of the piece feels like the sun is once again rising on a land that was once bathed in darkness. And it transitions into an arrangement of Zelda's Lullaby that incorporates strings and Malon's singing, before sending us back to the Lost Woods with Saria's song. This arrangement is fittingly celebratory to accompany all of the citizens of Hyrule in this moment, featuring more of Malon and calling back to the goofiness of the theme of Goron City. The strings bring us away from Saria's song and back to the Temple of Time, as we hear the harp that once introduced us to the goddesses of Hyrule, before the percussion brings us right back to Zelda's Lullaby, ending the game on an incredibly satisfying and emotional note. The church bell at the end of the credits theme always carried this sense of finality to it, and though you could always revisit the game again someday, it's not going to be the same as your first journey through it. Ocarina of Time carries with it strong themes of sentimental nostalgia, but it's more so about sorting through the emotional attachment to the days of our youth from a more mature perspective, with Sheik as your guide. Though those simpler days will never return, there are things from those days that persist and they should be cherished. Your friends, your loved ones, your memories, your growth as a person. Koji Kondo managed to assign subtext and meaning to each melody featured in Ocarina of Time, and allowed the players to directly interact with the world through those melodies. They represent the people you've met, and the trials you've overcome, both metaphorical and tangible. More than that, it's the attention to detail in the soundtrack, his ability to breathe life and personality into every minute area that make him both an excellent storyteller and game designer. His composing techniques flourish in the interactive medium, and Ocarina of Time serves as an example of not just how to use music in gameplay contexts, but in service of a game's world, atmosphere, and storytelling. Today, when I hear that ocarina on the title screen whisking me away, I think not just about the game's ability to immerse me in its world, but also how the ocarina as an instrument enabled us to appreciate and complete our adventure. Not just our adventure through the game, but also through childhood altogether. Koji Kondo's theme for Super Mario Bros. Was recently selected for preservation in the National Recording Registry of the Library of Congress, the first piece of music from a video game to ever be chosen. The first 6 notes of that theme were Paul McCartney's greeting to Kondo when he was invited backstage. Those first 6 notes were arranged and performed by an orchestra for a feature film last year, crossing over from one medium to another to enhance another project. While the melody lives on in the minds of countless people, Kondo made it clear in an interview with the Washington Post that he doesn't want to just be remembered for his melodies. He wants to be remembered for how his music enhanced the games people were playing. Here are his thoughts on the matter. "The thing I would be most happy with is if they weren't looking at the music in and of itself," Kondo said. "Rather, focus on the music and how it enhances the gameplay. If they come away with the music making their gaming experiences more fun, that would make me more happy than anything." Ocarina of Time feels like his thesis on how music can contribute to a game's design, and a perfect final solo soundtrack. His philosophy persists in Nintendo's games today. If you recall how enemies dance to the rhythm of a level's music in New Super Mario Bros., or the singing piranha plant levels in Super Mario Bros. Wonder. While Kondo excels at writing melodies, it's always been about how they are utilized in an interactive context. This game embodies everything I love about music in video games. In other words, I can totally understand why Ocarina sales skyrocketed after the release of this game. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to take some time away from Zelda and work on my own personal projects with World Anvil, a site that gives you the tools to not just build rich worlds and characters for the settings of your tabletop RPGs, but also your own stories in general. From the onset, it offers over 25 world-building templates with a wiki-esque structure, including features like interactive maps, custom timelines, and more. It prioritizes organization and lets you focus on what matters most, your imagination. For GMs, there are over 45 supported systems, including D&D 5e, and you also have the ability to create your own. For players, it has an extensive in-depth character management, with journals, a spellbook, inventory management, basically everything you could want. It is an all-in-one platform for world building, for pretty much any context you might want one. Visit worldanvil.com and use the coupon code Triforce for 51% off any yearly subscription. The link is in the description. As always, I've been Liam Triforce. Thanks for watching.